This is the OPPO Reno8 T, and if you've ever experienced what we sometimes call low battery anxiety, then this phone might seriously be worth thinking about getting. Now, this is a sponsored video, so I'm not making a review of this phone, but when OPPO reached out and asked me to do essentially an extreme low battery test and to compare it up against some pretty stiff competition, I just knew I had to say yes. Now, to set the scene, when it comes to tech devices in general, such as laptops and the like, whenever they reach super low levels of battery, it can often be a bit of an unknown as to when the device is actually going to run out of battery and therefore completely switch off. So for example, on Samsung phones, which are notorious for this, whenever they drop down to, let's say, 5% of battery left, you might think you have a solid 30 minutes plus remaining to continue using the phone however you were beforehand. But more often than not, their phones will burn through that final 5% of battery much faster than when the battery level was above 5%. And this is actually what OPPO really wanted me to put to the test in this video. So I've got the Reno8 T here, which I've drained all the way down to 5%, and I'm gonna put it up against the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, which has also been drained all the way down to 5%. And just for reference, both of these phones have 5,000 milliamp hour cells inside, so the comparison is definitely fair. And we're gonna first run through a series of battery intensive tasks in this controlled studio environment to see how the phones compare. I've got the OPPO Find X5 Pro in the middle here to act as a timer, and we're gonna start this test by first opening each phone's camera app, switching over to video mode, and starting a 1080p video recording. Obviously, the cameras are flush on the table here, so the camera systems aren't having to do a heap of work, but I've often found that capturing photos and videos is one of the most battery intensive tasks, so I thought it was worth starting the test here. Now, interestingly enough, after a minute, the Reno8 T has dropped down to 4%, but the Galaxy A53 5G is still sitting at 5%. And so, at least according to the software, it's holding up just a little bit better in the battery department. Then if we skip right ahead to the 5-minute mark and stop both recordings on both phones, you can see that the Reno8 T has dropped to 3% and the A53 5G has now dropped to 4%. So far, not looking promising for the OPPO phone, but here's where it gets interesting. I'm gonna close the camera app on each phone and open up a super battery intensive game called GT Racing 2. And this has a bunch of high quality graphics on show throughout, so it should really put both phones to the test. I'm gonna do a combination here of just watching a bunch of cutscene style animations alongside some actual gameplay. And once our timer has hit the 10-minute mark, you can see that the A53 5G has surprisingly dropped all the way down to 2%, seemingly out of nowhere, whereas the Reno8 T is still sitting at 3%. Then at about the 13-minute mark, the A53 5G has dropped down to 1% and the Reno8 T has dropped down to 2%. And then just past the 15-minute mark, the A53 hits 0 and completely dies, whereas impressively, the Reno8 T is still sitting at 2%. And so with that done, I'm just gonna leave this game open until the Reno8 T has died as well. I'm again alternating between actual gameplay and just sitting back and letting the animations roll through. And it's not until the 21-minute mark that the phone hits 1%, and then the phone is able to manage a full 5 minutes after that, at which point it finally dies. This means it stayed alive for an additional 11 minutes compared to the Galaxy A53 5G. And bear in mind, that was with a high intensity game playing. If we were just sitting on the phone's home screen or with the phone's display off, it obviously would have lasted a lot longer. And so as you saw, once the Galaxy A53 5G hit that 4% mark, it then drastically dropped all the way to 0 in under 10 minutes. Whereas once the Reno8 T hit 4%, it lasted another 24 minutes. And so overall, I think the key takeaway from this particular test is that when both phones fall under that 5% mark, the battery performance of the OPPO Reno8 T is almost 2 times the performance of the Samsung phone. But let's be honest, if your phone is sitting at 5% battery left, how realistic is it that you'd start playing a super battery intensive car racing game or start capturing a long form video? And so I thought if we're really gonna test this phone properly, then we should go outside and do more of a real world test where losing battery quickly could actually be a serious problem. All right, so here we are. We've come outside and it is a really hot day. So this is gonna be sort of worst case scenario for these two phones. But essentially I've juiced them back up to 5%. And all we're gonna do is open up Google Maps, set the destination to somewhere that's about a 15-minute walk away, and we're just gonna hit start. All right, so as you can see, both phones set to the same destination. Let's hit start, and off we go. Now, obviously, we're gonna be stopping and starting the camera a little bit as we film this test to make sure we can get all the shots that we need to get. But as far as I'm concerned, and so that you're aware, these phones will not stop the navigation process. They will continue running even when we stop and start the camera to get the different shots. As I said, it is a really, really hot day, so I am sweating a lot. Apologies if you see some sweat in this video. All right, so just an update. The Galaxy A53 5G is at 4%. OPPO phone is at 5%. But as we do this test, I thought it'd be interesting to tell you a story that happened to me to show how this sort of a test can actually happen in real life. So about 5 years ago, I was working at a location that I'd never been to before. And at the end of the shift, I was relying on my phone using Google Maps to get me home. But little did I know that the car phone charger I was using had actually stopped working, and about 5 minutes into the trip, the phone actually died. And so in the end, what should have taken me about 45 minutes to get home ended up taking me closer to an hour and a half. And from that point onwards, I've always suffered from a little bit of low battery anxiety myself. Okay, so we're about to come to a train line up here, but I can see that both phones are now sitting at 3%, so seems relatively similar in terms of how the phones are performing, though I will say the OPPO phone's display is quite a bit brighter, making it easy to see outside in this bright sunlight, whereas the A53 5G's display seems quite a bit dimmer. I'm not sure if that's because we're under 5% battery left, but still is going to impact how these phones perform in terms of battery. And just as I'm walking over this lovely train line, where I actually film quite a lot of my videos, but I can see that the Galaxy A53 5G has dropped down to 2%. OPPO phone is still at 3%. All right, we're still 8 minutes away from our destination, and the A53 5G has just dropped to 1%, so it's on its last legs. The OPPO phone's still on 2%. Oh, and check this out. After only 15 minutes of walking, the Galaxy A53 5G has just died, whereas the Reno is still sitting at 1%, and we've got about 10 minutes more of our destination to go. All right, so we've just come on to the final stretch. Destination is just 3-minute walk down there. Phone's sitting at 1%, so hopefully it gets us to the destination. Okay, so we've reached our final destination, and it is really hot, so I am sweating up a storm, so I apologize for that, but at least you know the test was real. But as we're setting up this final camera shot, the phone did eventually die, but I think the main thing is that it got us to our destination successfully. And the fact that we're out here, it's really hot, phone display was at its max brightness, and we're still able to walk for actually 30 minutes in the end. Even though it was 15 minutes away, we're able to walk for 30 minutes because we're filming and stopping and starting everything. That is really impressive. And the Galaxy A53 5G actually died 15 minutes ago. And you know, in these crunch situations where you're trying to get to a destination, having even that extra 15 minutes is really, really important. Okay, from there, let's quickly chat about how OPPO has managed to pull off such impressive low battery performance with the Reno8 T. So firstly, I think the key reason is that OPPO has actually exclusively tuned the Reno8 T's battery and software in such a way to make sure that you're not only getting a really impressive, long-lasting battery experience, but you're also getting a really reliable software experience in terms of battery as well. I've often said on my channel that Samsung cuts costs with their mid to lower end devices by placing a fairly generic, unoptimized software skin on their phones, which allows for less overheads in the software department, but that is often the direct cause of why you experience such unreliable battery stats, because the software has not been exclusively tuned for every specific device, unlike the Reno8 T, which is the complete opposite. So that's reason number one, exclusive software and battery tuning. But then on top of all of the regular battery saving modes that come built in with Android 13, which by the way is the software version that ships with the Reno8 T, this phone also has a couple of handy software features on top of those for even better battery performance. So for example, there's the super power saving mode, and whenever this is activated, the phone will optimize performance in such a way that even when you have as little as 5% battery left, you'll still be able to make phone calls, send messages, and even use navigation until you find somewhere to charge. Then there's the super nighttime standby mode, and with this enabled, it'll keep your phone's power usage to an absolute minimum overnight, meaning it will drop as low as 2.7% over an 8-hour period, which is fantastic for anyone who often forgets to put their phone on charge before they sleep. So essentially, OPPO has introduced a range of game-changing software and battery tuning features with this phone, and all of these combine to produce outstanding results when it comes to battery performance. Now, aside from the battery, which I'm sure you'll all agree is really impressive with this phone, what about everything else? Well, for one, the unboxing is a pretty feature-rich one because on top of the phone, you also get a nice matte-coated clear TPU style case in the box, which is very handy, as well as a standard USB-C to USB-A cable. And then we also get a 33-watt Super VOOC charger included as well. And for me, having both the charger and the case included in the box is a huge thumbs up for OPPO. Then in terms of software, as mentioned, this phone ships with Android 13 out of the box with OPPO's own ColorOS 13 on top. And I actually did an entire video showcasing each of the new features that came with ColorOS 13, which I'll link up in the cards and down below. But in short, ColorOS 13 is by far the best iteration of ColorOS we've had so far, with a bunch of cool features to boot. And for mine, this is a software experience that makes the Reno8 T feel a heck of a lot more expensive than it is. And then we have the design of the phone, which, as you can see, has this beautifully vibrant fiberglass leather finish on the back, metal side rails, and despite the fairly decently sized chin on the front here, which, to be honest, most people buying this phone won't even think about after an hour or so of use, the phone genuinely looks and feels really nice and premium. Oh, and this top part of the camera unit also has a little RGB LED ring built into it, which OPPO calls the orbit light. And this will change its color and even its flashing pattern depending on differing activities, like whether you're receiving a phone call or charging the phone. And this is a super neat inclusion that just makes what is already a pretty cool looking phone on the back look even cooler. The display itself is an OLED and has a beautifully fluid 90 Hz refresh rate. And for me, particularly at this price point, 90 Hz is the perfect compromise between feeling silky smooth whilst also maintaining the best battery performance possible, which is just another aspect that makes the battery on this phone so impressive. And for those wondering about the cameras, well, this phone actually comes with two, a super impressive 100 megapixel main sensor for capturing ultra detailed shots, and then the first ever 40x micro lens for a phone at this price point, which captures some crazy microscopic style camera shots. Like actually bonkers that I can use this phone to see that close to objects. But to wrap this up, on top of all of the other really impressive features that make this phone a pretty solid value offering, if you're someone who needs to push your phone's battery to its absolute limits, then the fact that this phone offers you that sort of confidence is huge. And for me, I often find that in this pricing category, the default option for a lot of people is the Galaxy A lineup from Samsung. And whilst they are good phones in many different ways, like I said, if you're after battery performance reliability, then you should seriously consider getting the Reno8 T instead. But that's it. A big thank you to OPPO for sending the Reno8 T my way and for supporting the channel. And if you want to see more extreme battery tests like the one I did in this video, let me know down in the comments below. Aside from that, if you enjoyed the video, then a sub to the channel would be greatly appreciated. But that's it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will catch you later.